Greetings, paper demons! Welcome to another live stream. Glad to have you here, and today we're going to be talking about color. This is a pretty beginner level lesson, so if you already have some color theory experience, you may not learn too much here, but I am going to cover a little bit of intermediate topics too on color later, but today I'm mostly going to be talking about monochromatic color. Now, this is a really easy color technique that you can use in your artwork to make it look nice. And I like this particular approach because it's really easy for beginners to approach. But before I explain how monochromatic color works, I'd like to explain a little bit about some of the technical terms that are used when talking about color. So there's two things to keep in mind. As artists, you'll hear teachers talk about these concepts like hue and value. So hue, when we're talking about hue or color, usually we're talking about, is this on the red side? Is this on the orange side? Is this more purple or blue or whatever? And then there's this concept of something called value. And this means how light or how dark something is. And the thing that I want you to understand, if you get anything out of this lesson at all, it's that color and hue are not as important as you think they are. What do I mean by that? I have a couple of photographs that I'd like to show you. So here's a photograph, and I'd like you to tell me, or just think for a moment, what is depicted in this photograph right now? It's a little bit on the dark side, but what's depicted here is a rose. What color is the rose? Well, it's probably red, but there's no color information here at all. We know that roses are usually red, or what other colors are roses? White. There's a spectrum of colors that we'll usually see roses depicted as, but we can tell from looking at this photograph, even though it's only black and white, we can tell what it is. I have a couple other examples here. So take a look at this photograph and think for a moment, what is this? What am I seeing? You could post in the chat too. So this is a photograph depicting strawberries. Well, how do we know it's a strawberry? How do we know these are strawberries? We think of strawberries, we think of them as being red when they're ripe, right? And they look very ripe. We can tell that they're ripe because they're dark, but there's no color here at all. The reason that this it's gonna blow your mind is you're gonna realize that color is not the most important piece of information to convey what something is. The most important thing is value. So back to my little slide here, value is again the lightness or darkness of something. Okay, and I have one more. What is this? You might have to step back from the screen a little bit to tell what it is. What do you see in this picture here? Dragon Lady, do you know what it is? Yes, cherries, that is correct. Ding, 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 you get 20 billion points. So how do we know it's cherries? There's no red here. Cherries are typically red or like a really dark red. We somehow know what they are based on values. This doesn't mean that color isn't important, but it means that it's not important in the way that we think it is. Color is not really useful to us as artists as a means of conveying what the subject matter is. Rather, color can be used as a means of creative expression to convey emotion or time of day or other sorts of things. But those are more advanced color topics. For now, I'm going to share basically what monochromatic color is. But first, I just wanted to explain real quick what the difference between hue and value are. A monochromatic palette basically means choosing one hue and working only with that hue for your piece and adjusting the value scale along that hue. So for example, today's challenge that we have on Paper Demon right now, we're doing the Pride color challenge, and today's color is red. Kind of coincidental that the last two photos were of red objects, or last three photos were of red objects. So we are going to be working with red today. So what a red color palette might look like, we not only have, apparently I can't select the right layer. Okay, so will it let me draw on this layer? Yes, okay, success. So we not only have red as we traditionally think of it, we can adjust. Actually, in most color editors, you will have like a slider for adjusting the lightness or darkness. It's basically the same thing as value. So we can go on the lighter end of the spectrum all the way down to darker darker colors. Now there's also, in addition to this, we can play with the saturation. So how much of the hue is in there? Oh, it disappeared. Okay, Dragon Lady is saying that I am no longer visible. Hello. So I was talking about how we could take that color of red, we can adjust scale of value, how dark, how light it is. In addition to that, we can also play with the saturation. So for example, if we were to start with red at the mid-tone value and drag the saturation slider, we now have that roughly that same value, same level of lightness and darkness, but now it's got less of the red hue in it. So if we think about those two different spectrums, I guess, so there's two different axes. Axes? What's the right? How do you say plural of axis? Axi? So we've got on this end we might have saturation, and on this end we have value. And then like down here you'd imagine would be full gray, meaning no hue in it. And then you can imagine a gradient in between these two things. So that's the difference between hue and value. So if we're thinking about monochromatic, we're basically taking out the third thing, hue. We're just focusing on one hue, which is red. So how might we use that in illustration? Well, let me give you a demonstration. I have Ninja Girl character, and one thing we could do is start painting her and only use reds. And what's nice about only using red is it'll feel very unified. So I might start, make my brush a little bit bigger so I can work a little faster here. I could play with the saturation, make her hair dark, could give her a pink band for her bandana. She's mixed race, so she has kind of a darker skin tone. So I can fill in the whites of her eyes. So I can convey quite a bit of information, even though I'm only using really one color. Indicator teeth. Color is one of those things that takes a lot of practice. This particular technique is pretty easy for beginners. I think anyone can start using this right away with whatever medium. And these concepts apply whether you're doing digital art or you're doing traditional art. It's all the same stuffs. Okay, so I can also add some highlights to her skin tone, add some shadows. So that's like basically one way that you could apply this monochrome color technique. And her suit is dark. Under pressure. That's what it's like, live streaming. Under pressure. I might want to highlight her skin a little bit more. That's a little messy. Under pressure. Oh, she's so cute. So another way we can do this is we could take a really graphical approach, which actually I think would work nicer with this particular drawing. We can color the lines red, darker red than what we used for the background, and just use a mid-tone for the background. And we can add highlights and shadows. So basically adding in the shadows, not worrying about the mid-tone. This is actually a pretty easy technique to do also. And then we just add in the highlights. So this actually looks pretty good with this artwork compared to the last one we did. Mostly because, you know, this being a cartoon, this technique works pretty well for that. And I'm gonna use this darker color to fill in the eyes. And done. That one was even faster, like, to fill in than the last round. She's gonna have teeth. It never ceases to amaze me how much a little highlighting can make something pop. Yes, it's true. I've seen artists do like an outline around artwork, and that also can make it pop. So for example, we could either do like a dark outline like this, or we could do a light outline. So that's pretty much it. It's a pretty simple concept. If you have any questions about it, I'm happy to answer those. By keeping it and stick with that one hue and trying to reproduce it or make it look photorealistic and just stick with that one color, that does make it easier too, because then you're not worrying too much about the added dimension of color, because color can make things a lot more complicated, especially when you're not at the point yet where you're understanding of that concept of value. Let me show you. I have so this is a painting I did at university. It looks photorealistic, but it's a painting. It's an acrylic painting. So I staged this and photographed it, and then had to copy the photograph with acrylic paint. So this was like an academic assignment meant to teach you how to observe value. So you're not dealing with the color part yet and just focusing on understanding value and learning how to render things realistically. And then after we did this assignment, then we had to do a similar one but with color. So it's definitely a good way to practice and learn. If you have questions, I have answers. Ask them. Working with colored pencils, what you'll probably have to do, what I used to do, I haven't worked with colored pencils in a really long time, but you'd have to mix different pencils in order to get the spread that you want. So for example, if you're trying to get like a really dark red, you might have to do a mixture of the black pencil and a lighter red pencil. If you can, if you're like trying to find two mid values, like example here. So let's say you have a pencil that does this and you have a pencil that is like pink like this, but you wanted something in between. I would use these two pencils together rather than trying to use white or trying to use black with the pink, because what black's gonna do, black and white are going to desaturate the pencils. Okay, Burger Time says contrasting colors. I know the rule of thumb is to go directly across on a color wheel. Yes, that's actually called complementary colors, which is something I'm going to cover on Thursday. Are there any examples you can think of that might not be so extreme? Yes, that would be analogous colors, which I'm covering tomorrow. See, you have great questions that lead directly into my next lesson. That's always wonderful when that happens. And then also, do you think it makes sense to try to use a different hue of the same color to contrast something? Do you mean by different hue of the same value to contrast something? If you have two colors that are, or two swatches or palette colors that are the same value but different hues, a very interesting phenomenon will happen where your eyes will be confused. Let me see if I can give you an example. That might be close enough. So you have different cones in your eyes that are for receiving. It really depends on your monitor. It's really hard to explain this, but if you have 2 or 3 palette colors basically that are the same value, as in light and dark, so they're in the same part of the spectrum here of light to dark, but they're different hues, it actually doesn't create much contrast because some of the cones in your eye will detect it as being the same color, because some of the cones in your eye are specifically for detecting the value scale. So how light or how dark something is. We have more cones for that than we do for hue. So when the hue is different, but the value is the same, then the colors almost look like they're vibrating. Can I use light blue to contrast a dark blue? Yes. Whenever you're talking about contrast, if you want contrast, you want to have something that is from this end of the value scale to this end of the value scale. The further apart those two shades are, the more contrast you have. So for example, dark blue with light blue line art is you can see it, no problem. So contrast is more about value and less about the actual color itself. Yes, that's correct. I do recommend spending some time doing black and white for anyone who wants to get better at understanding tone. Working in black and white is a great way to learn. Y'all, have a great evening.